Thank you all for joining. I'm Yvonne Tevis. I'm Chief of Staff in the IT department at the UC Office of the President. And I'm also a longtime member of the System-Wide Electronic Accessibility Committee, which is hosting this webinar. And we all just really want to thank you for joining us on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We have a lot of great speakers and topics lined up. There will be time at the end for questions, but if you want to pop some into Q&A, our panelists will also try to answer a few as we go along. And I will be launching a poll at the very end because we do want to get some feedback from you. So now let's turn to the agenda. Super. We're going to start with a great presentation called Building Bridges for Everyone by Darren Jensen. Then moving into an interview between Tanya Johnson and Jill Walters to describe a UC staff person's experience with temporary disabilities. After that, Travis Lee is going to give us a demo of Ally, which is a tool that helps make LMS content accessible. Then Doug Harriman is going to talk to us about rich text editors and how to make sure you stay accessible while you're using them. Joshua Horry is going to give a keyboard user demo. And then we're going to have a game with Doug Harriman, Chris Patterson, Judy Ty, a game of accessibility-friendly Feud. And then finally, Jim Phillips will wrap it up with a presentation about why accessibility matters. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our first speaker, Darren Jensen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here today. My name is Darren Jensen. I am a data visualization analyst at the Office of Institutional Research and Academic Planning at UC's Office of the President. I'm also a member of the UCOP IT Accessibility Work Group. And I'm going to share some ideas about why accessibility matters and how a fundamental mind shift can make the digital world a better place for all of us. Let's witness a common exchange in the IT world. An accessibility expert, played by Yvonne today, has tested a human resources survey to be issued system-wide and is telling the developer, played by Jill today, that the survey isn't accessible to people with disabilities.
Hey, Jill, this survey isn't accessible, but everyone needs to be able to take it, including people with disabilities.
Well, can't we just reach out to the people with disabilities and help them out?
Well, it's an HR survey. Would you want somebody else entering your personal information for you?
I get it. It's about privacy and independence.
That's right, exactly. So let's fix it and make it accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Jill and Yvonne. Let's talk enlightenment. You may or may not know that you are among people with disabilities all the time. You may know of someone's disability because it is outwardly obvious or because they have shared it with you. But of all the people whose disability is known to you, there are many more that you don't know about. This can be because they are not obvious or because they are intentionally hidden. One of the reasons we are here today is because we want to destigmatize and demystify disabilities so people don't feel like they have to hide who they are. I'm going to list several disabilities. Some you will recognize as such, and some you won't have thought of before. Some are permanent, some are temporary or episodic, and some are situational. Some involve mobility, some involve cognition, and some involve the stimulating senses. Some involve all of these. All can affect the way a person is able to interact with the digital world. Motor control affected by multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, muscular dystrophy, seizure disorders, cerebral palsy, broken, sprained, and amputated limbs, carpal tunnel syndrome, paralysis, hearing loss and deafness, macular degeneration and other vision loss and blindness, including color blindness, learning disabilities and differences, neurodivergence, ADHD, chronic fatigue, stress response, panic attacks, social anxiety, COVID fog, stroke recovery, autism. This is an illustrative list, not a comprehensive one. I welcome email that helps us build out this list. Any one of these can make it difficult to interact online and with digital media, and very many people have one or more of these disabilities. In our vision of an accessible internet and digital environment, these disabilities disappear or nearly disappear in the user experience. The internet might be the only place where one's disability can become a non-barring fact of their life. Digital accessibility matters because digital content and the internet is our social and professional commons where everyone, no matter their circumstance, deserves to enjoy the rich experience of accessing the same content. So what do we do? Maybe it's best to proceed first with what we don't do. What we don't do or should not do is just help people access the content that is designed for the majority. To say, how can I help you? Or let me do that for you. Let me read to you or describe for you, robs them of their autonomy and perpetuates the othering of disabled folks. It is not what people with disabilities need, and it's not what they want. The let me help you with that mindset impedes on their privacy and removes the singular self from self-identity because suddenly you've interjected yourself into their disabled identity. I am not suggesting that disabled people want their disability ignored or denied. Very much the contrary. They want to own it and live it fully. They do not need you to be disabled with them or help them be disabled. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago with an outside vendor about re-architecting a platform that presents rich data primarily through an interactive map display. When I brought up the need to have accessibility baked into the design, there were concerns about the complexity and cumbersomeness of one design that would serve all stakeholders, and it was suggested that an alternative branch could be designed to address some, I emphasize some, of the accessibility issues. This is not a solution. This is tokenizing the disabled. This is accommodation, not inclusion. Disability allies do not stand on corners to assist those in wheelchairs over the curb. Disability allies rebuild the curb to allow a wheelchair user to independently navigate the intersection. In the case of the web map platform, we may not be able to mitigate all the accessibility issues inherent in map and graphic representation right away, but I know for sure that we never will if we never start. This gets us to what we do, what we should do. We should start with the mind shift. Let go of the idea that there are two populations we designed for. Most of us and the rest of us. This architecture paradigm will always have at least two branches, and I believe that separate can never be equal. So create, design, and build for one community that includes everyone. In fact, there is only one single user we should design for, and that is the person who is just like yourself and may have one or more of the disabilities I mentioned earlier. When we make this mind shift, we can move on to some practical suggestions and reminders. Number one, make accessibility part of every conversation about content creation from the very start. If you consider accessibility from the beginning, it will never be reduced to an afterthought or a second thought. Number two, recognize that access does not mean dumbing down design or function. In fact, our mind shift allows us to see accessible design as elevated. If we embrace it, elegance will follow. Number three, let go of the myth that accessibility means fewer features because the reality is it means more features. And number four, accessibility is more efficient. If we don't build it in, we will tack it on, and then we will have structural and maintenance issues that will take time to mitigate and prevent us from moving on to the next great idea. I think of my kids and their battle against homework. They spend so much time resisting doing what they know they must, that by the time they do their homework, they have used up their free time for all the other stuff they would like to do. Imagine we all live on the banks of a river. It is a lovely little town where everyone enjoys freedom and fun. We party all the time. but all the food and drink is on the opposite bank. It's hot in this tropical town and the river is placid, so most people don't mind swimming across to have lunch. But there are a few of us who don't swim at all for all kinds of reasons. It doesn't matter why she or they can't swim across the river, but they get to have lunch too. So we give them a boat and they row across the river and have lunch. And then it's another boat for someone else, but they can't row, so that boat has to have a motor. And then it's another boat for someone with a different ability, all to get everyone the same lunch. Lunch that, by the way, we didn't get to eat together because not everyone arrived on the opposite bank at the same time. Our little town spends a lot of time designing and building boats for different people with different abilities. Then one smart little kid says out loud, "Hey, why don't we build a bridge across the river? Then we can all cross together." Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm going to pass it back to Jill for the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. I want to reiterate your statement. We are here today because we want to destigmatize and demystify disabilities so people don't feel like they have to hide who they are. I'm Jill Walters, the Web Standards Program Manager from UCSF IT Web Services. My job includes creating awareness about digital accessibility. As Darren said, some disabilities are hidden. There might be things people are struggling with that we aren't aware of. This could include cognitive disabilities or something that we just don't see due to the nature of working from home. Some disabilities are sudden or unexpected. Some are temporary due to an accident. Remember to keep digital accessibility in mind for staff too. We must not forget our dear coworkers, our teammates, the people that we work with in our organization. I'm going to interview one of my peers to share some insight on her recent experience with an unexpected disability and how it affected her work. If questions come up during our short interview, please put them in the Q&A and we will follow up later. With that, I'd like to introduce my UCSF coworker, Tanya Jansen.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for including me today.
Great to have you with us for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Tanya. Please tell us about your role at UCSF, what you do, and what types of technology you use.
I work in IT. I'm their communications person, so I use all the usual technology, laptop, cell phone, all of those things.
Please tell us your story about your unexpected temporary disability.
Yeah, so like Darren said, there are unexpected sudden disabilities. So I broke my wrist and I have like a crazy contraption on my hand right now. And I did this back in December just because I'm clumsy. So I tripped and fell and ended up with a broken wrist.
And how did this impact your day-to-day job duties?
It impacted everything. I went from being able to work with both hands to being one-handed. A lot of people think, well, if you broke your dominant hand, don't you just become, left-handed or whatever your non-dominant hand was? But it doesn't work like that, because if you think about it, you pretty much use both your hands and everything. So it slowed down my typing quite a bit. I don't know that that's a negative, because when I type really fast, I could have a typo tiara, but it slowed that down. It made everything go slower. Even if you think about brushing your teeth or tying your shoes, being unable to do that suddenly was a huge shift in my personal and work life.
Yeah. Were there any workarounds, any technology workarounds that you implemented to try to complete your work task?
Yeah, so I use talk to text quite a bit, and it is really great in Word. The thing I didn't realize was that it picked up all the noise. So all of your background noise is picked up. I was working on an article and had a podcast playing in the background, and I was just talking to my document and it was picking up all of the podcast instead of what I was saying. So that was interesting. And then using Zoom for captioning and recording meetings really helped me not have to type, because initially I would be on a meeting call and if I was taking notes, I would furiously try to have a cell phone in my hand and type the notes to myself. And it just was more effective to use the Zoom auto captioning, which I really love.
Excellent. And when you had your accident, did you reach out to Office of Health and Safety or HR for some support or accommodation?
No, I didn't. And that was I didn't think about it. And that was kind of a funny thing, because if the accident would have happened at work, all of those things would have just fallen into place. Like my boss would have filled out a workers' compensation form and I would have had like OHS immediately involved. But because it didn't, I didn't even think of doing those things, reaching out like that. I just thought, oh, it's just temporary and I can deal with it. And this happened in December. I still have like this crazy brace to get the movement back. So sometimes temporary can be a bit longer than you think it's going to be.
Exactly. How did your experience influence or change how you think about just digital accessibility?
It was a great learning experience. I'll say that, because prior to this, I would fall into the category of other people when they think about disability. The tendency is to focus on hearing or sight impaired, and that's certainly not every disability, as Darren illustrated. There are many disabilities. Some are quite hidden, some are very obvious, like this one, but it just really broadened my perspective on accessibility and being temporarily disabled. It gave me a greater appreciation for people who go through these things every day, all the time.
Great, thanks for sharing. I wish you continued healing for your temporary disability, and I want to thank you again for sharing your personal experience and how it expanded your perspective on disabilities.
Thank you for including me, and hopefully this will change some other people's perspectives too, and maybe get a conversation going about it.
Right, that's what we want. Thanks for letting us share Tanya's story with you. Next up, I'm turning it over to Travis.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Travis Lee. I'm the Disabilities and Computing Program Coordinator at UCLA. That pretty much means me and my department, we oversee the UCLA campus for digital accessibility. And I'm going to be speaking to you today about LMS accessibility, some of the challenges students with disabilities face in online education, as well as a new tool that UCLA has recently adopted called the Ally tool by Blackboard. So I'm going to get started. All right. So the Ally demo and making LMS content accessible. All right, so I often think about accessibility because it's my job, but maybe you guys in the audience don't always think about digital accessibility. And this is how I like to frame it. I like to understand digital accessibility as a relationship between you as a developer over here at B and the end user who may or may not have a disability. And in this case, this person looks like she may have a disability. The student is most likely blind and she's likely using a screen reader or a screen magnifier. And our job as developers, content editors, designers are to remove the obstacles from allowing her assistive technology from working. And that's what accessibility is. Accessibility is the relationship between you and the end user. And your job is to help that person by removing the obstacles. And that's how I look at it. So what are some assistive technologies and the disabilities that are aligned to that technology? And what are we testing against? What are we thinking about in the world of digital accessibility? So as I mentioned, screen readers for the blind and low vision, that's a very common one that we kind of speak to because that technology is relatively unique and complex in the way that it takes in documents and websites. So getting that stuff, getting your content formatted correctly is sometimes challenging for screen readers. So it's a big one that we always focus on. Captions for the deaf and hard of hearing. You see, we have an ASL interpreter as well. That's even the next level for accessibility for this population. Keyboard only navigation for dexterity. So oftentimes we think about, okay, we're using a mouse, and that's the way people use the internet or the way they use their computers. But the reality is a lot of people don't even use a mouse, and we need to make our content keyboard navigable by coding it correctly, or making your documents, how you encode your documents in the reading order as well. So screen magnifier for the low vision. A lot of people who are technically blind are actually just low vision, and they often use screen magnifiers. And that you kind of think about how your website or how your document might look with a 400% increase. Color contrast for the colorblind. We know that many men, I think 1 in 7 men, has some sort of color blindness. Clickable area from mobility impairment, flashing elements for epilepsy. I remember reviewing a website recently that had a looping video, and that could be an issue for people with epilepsy. Cluttered pages for people with learning disabilities and anxiety disorders. This is an issue that I see in the LMS. Oftentimes when faculty are kind of running late with their content, and they just kind of it's kind of like they shovel up a lot of their content onto a few pages, and it's best to learn how to chunk your material in the LMS. And real text, like OCR text for dyslexia. I think about this as kind of interesting that people with dyslexia and blind people are very different in their disability, yet what they need in terms of accessibility is very similar. They need real text, which is OCR text. You might have found PDFs that are image only. That's a big accessibility issue for many different disabilities. And you know it's image only when you can't highlight, you can't copy and paste. And this is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, is document accessibility and how do we mitigate that. I do want to speak to online education. I come from a background of instructional design, and I think about our students, especially students with disabilities. And I do really believe that online education and hybrid education often is a really great option for our student populations with disabilities. A lot of students, are immunocompromised, therefore they don't feel comfortable, or they can't go to in classroom. They can't participate in person. There's students with depression and anxiety that it could have a flare up. So I think online education is really suited for certain disabilities, and it's a great option for many of our students. But it also poses many challenges in terms of digital accessibility. And I want to just highlight a few of the issues in online accessibility and some of the disabilities aligned to it. So isolation and loneliness, this is actually was taken from the year 2020 when everyone was online. So it didn't surprise me that isolation and loneliness was really high during that period for our students, especially those with disabilities. Attention was a major issue in online courses. We know that from actual experimentation that attention in online courses is much more challenging for younger populations, which is why you see graduate programs being much more successful as a fully online modality. And attention in general in online environments, like I'm sure a lot of you are checking out a bunch of other tabs. I have like 100 tabs open when I use the internet. So we have to think about how to retain the attention in these online courses. Time management, again, is something that all of our students face challenges in online education because they don't have that constant check-in during a discussion section, for example. Inaccessible reading materials, which I'm going to speak to in a little bit. That's also a major issue in our online course because our faculty are uploading so much content to the LMS that a lot of that content is not going to be formatted correctly. A lack of captions for the deaf and hard of hearing. We know that at UCLA, at least, it is very challenging to get all of our lecturers captions. It's just the cost is insurmountable. So we're looking at automated captions. We're looking at alternatives to having a live captioner. Screenshots of graphics and tables without alt text. This is really common in STEM. I've seen this in a lot of courses where they kind of just take a screenshot of a graph or table without any caption or alt text to it. That's a major challenge for a lot of students who are blind. Okay, and this is where I move into the Blackboard. So with all those challenges that I've spoken to you about in the assistive technologies, one of the ways that UCLA is addressing one aspect of accessibility within our new LMS, we just migrated our entire university from Moodle to Canvas. And in doing so, we had made a commitment as a university to become more accessible. We're looking at making our Canvas environment called Brew and Learn as accessible as possible. And one of the ways we're doing that is we invested in this tool called the Ally tool by Blackboard. And it's a document remediation tool. I like to think of it as more of a student-facing tool, and it allows students to download their documents into different formats. For example, if you as a faculty upload a PDF that's not formatted correctly, but the Ally tool will attempt to remediate that document for the student, and the student will have a different download options. I'll show you a screenshot in a little bit, but one of the download options is an MP3 format. So that's great for students who have dyslexia, but it's also great for students who are commuting by car and want to listen to their documents. So this is a really good tool. I think of it more as a universal design tool than a real disability tool. At UCLA, we've come up with kind of a vision and objectives within our rollout of the Ally tool and the early implementation phases. We're looking really to just make our courses more accessible and without having to impact the workflow or the faculty time required to build these courses, because faculty are already very, very busy migrating their courses from Moodle to Canvas. We wanted a tool that's very lightweight for the faculty side that really is high impact at the same time. So our objective is to introduce Ally to UCLA. We're doing that right now. We want to set some benchmarks, kind of understand where we currently are in digital accessibility, actually have some quantitative data to back up like where we're going and where we are at UCLA around LMS and online education accessibility. We also want to validate student interest in alternative formats. We want to collect data on the disability needs. We also are looking at hopefully reducing the need for accommodations at our Center for Accessible Education, which is our student-facing office. We want to reduce that load on them and reduce the time students take to get a remediated document. So this is what a rollout plan might look like at your UC school. We have about a 6-month runway here. So we purchased a tool, I believe, in winter, in I think November, December last year. So we began to pilot the tool in January. We should actually started this a little early, but we launched a tool midway through our winter quarter. And then we onboarded again in spring quarter. So right now we have 20 courses that have the Ally tool. We're collecting data. We really wanted a good mix of STEM courses and also our humanities and social science courses. What we're finding is that the Ally tool is much better for our non-STEM courses because STEM has quite a bit of math equations and scientific jargon that is not quite, the tool is not as good, well suited for that, for example. So it's good. I just want to encourage people, if they are going to implement a tool like this, to have a runway, to have an implementation plan and track the data and look and see what's working, what's not working. So here's what the Ally dashboard looks like for faculty. This is a very powerful tool in that it will walk the faculty through how to remediate the document. So essentially, you can't do the document remediation in the LMS environment. So you can't click and add alt text. You have to the faculty still has to have the original document and remediate the document in Word or in PDF, wherever they authored that document. But this tool walks the faculty through this process. And I think that's a really cool feature of the tool for faculty who are interested in remediating documents. So this is what it looks like from the faculty view. And it also kind of gives the faculty a little bit of like a speedometer here, or this is like our accessibility meter. And right now this document is at 38% accessible. From the student side, this is where I really think the secret sauce is. The power of the tool is really on the student-facing side. We know that a lot of UCLA faculty don't have the time to actually go in and remediate everything, but we still want to have these documents more accessible to our end users, our students. And this is where the power of the tool comes in. So even with the faculty being not engaged at all with accessibility, the students will still have this available to them, right? So this is the different download formats they could get this document in. So this is originally a Word document. Tag PDF is a very popular download format. HTML, we know HTML is generally more accessible than almost any other document format. EPUB, electronic braille is great, so refreshable braille displays. We have MP3, which I mentioned earlier. That's really great for people with dyslexia and also for people commuting, and Beeline Reader. So these are all the different formats. It really puts the power, it gives the power, empowers the student to download their document in the format which works best for them. And that's what universal design is all about, universal design for learning included. So Ally for students, what are the benefits to the students? Giving students the ability to download formats which most align to how they learn, and they don't need to seek as much help. Hopefully it will reduce the accommodations load. We talk about accommodations as sometimes a timely and costly process because the accommodation focuses on an individual person, whereas accessibility is about universal design, about everyone having access to these tools. Students with disabilities will feel more included and supported in online education. We found at Berkeley, for example, who had this tool for 3 years, that there was a lot of English language learners who were down using this tool. So the impact may be beneficial to populations that we haven't even thought about. Alignment to universal design for learning. And this is an interesting one, not having to out yourself as a disabled student. As someone with a disability who mainstreamed myself halfway through my college, a lot of students with disabilities feel ashamed or embarrassed about receiving accommodations. And this is a way that they can just be invisible and download their formats in the format that they want to. So this is a good way. This is kind of an invisible way. This is what accessibility is all about, is giving people the choice. From the faculty point of view, I really hope that eventually faculty will become engaged with the tool and be engaged with document remediation or even HTML remediation for their online courses. So remediate documents based on the Ally tool feedback, raise awareness for document accessibility, and raise awareness. A lot of faculty are not even aware of the challenges that students with disabilities face in their reading material. They just don't know what they don't know. And this is a way to point out some of the challenges that students with disabilities face specifically in accessing documents. They could check the accessibility of their score. There's an aggregate score. We're not sure we're going to turn that on at UCLA yet, but there is an aggregate score for their entire course. And we could maybe incentivize making that score better or support faculty who are interested in raising that score. And in the end, faculty don't need to do anything and their documents are more accessible. Like I said, it's really a student-facing tool in my mind. So that's my presentation on LMS accessibility and the Ally tool. I really encourage you to look at this tool. It is quite costly at UCLA. For our number of students, is around $80,000 per year. So think about that if you're going to write a grant for this. So I'm going to pass it off now to Doug Harriman, who's going to talk about the rich content editor.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Douglas Harriman. I am an instructional and web designer with Office of the President. And this year for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, I wanted to talk to you about maintaining accessibility as you use rich text editors. Now, I'm guessing that many of you will have encountered rich text editors before. They are in so many of the web environments we navigate these days, including many of those we use here at UC. For example, here is the rich text editor within the Canvas LMS, which you might use if you're creating pages or crafting assignment or discussion prompts. This is the rich text editor within the Cascade CMS. It's one of our tools for building web pages. And the rich text editor within Alchemire, formerly known as Survey Gizmo. And I would not at all be surprised if you have encountered numerous other rich text editors, either in your role here at UC or outside of it just while using the internet. Rich text editors allow us to add and edit content within certain web spaces. We can type in text and format it, and we can also work with other types of content like lists, links, tables, images, etc. So if we're going to be using rich text editors and working with all of those types of content, we need to learn to do so accessibly so that everyone can read and engage with what we create. So in this session, I'm going to take you through this screenshot of the Cascade Rich Text Editor. And with any feature that has an accessibility consideration involved, I'm going to highlight the feature and share the accessibility consideration with you. Now, 2 quick notes before I get started. First, rich text editors, or RTE, as you may hear them abbreviated, they are configurable. So the controls and layout you encounter in the various rich text editors you use are going to vary from what I'm showing you today. But I feel pretty confident that you will find most of these features in most rich text editors. And certainly the accessibility considerations involved are universal to all rich text editors. And they're actually universal to most content editing tools. So Word, PowerPoint, Google Docs, even email, you could totally apply a lot of this guidance in those settings as well. Second, I just wanted to let you know in advance, I will be sharing this slide deck with you afterwards, along with all the links you're going to see and my speaking notes. So you don't need to rush to jot either of those down right now. You can just sit back and follow along. And also in there, you'll find a few extra tips and some practice exercises with video demonstrations and an answer key so that you can get some experience applying some of the guidance I'll be sharing with you today. All right, well, let's get started. And the first feature I wanted to talk about is tables. If you're including tables in your rich text editors, there are a few things we ask you to apply and keep in mind, starting with you should use table header cells to provide column and row reminders. Now, to give you a sense of how big a difference these make, I want you to imagine that you're reading through a table, like this table of a baseball player's hitting statistics, and also imagine that you're reading through it using a screen reader. That's a type of software that's going to read aloud whatever's on your computer. So if you're blind or have difficulty seeing or maybe have dyslexia, you can follow along and fully engage with the digital environment. So you're reading through the first data row of this table. Your screen reader is giving you information like 17, column 7, and 1, column 1. Okay, good to get that information. But the problem is, even this early into reading into the table, you've probably lost track of what column 8 represents. So you're not going to know what that data point 1 really means. And similarly, if you were to read down this column, you'd hear 58 row 3, but again, you might not know what row 3 represents, so you're not going to know what that data point 58 really means. That's where table header cells would come in. You typically program them in the first row of a table that labels what is in each column, and sometimes as well, you'll program them in the first column of a table, or at least when you have a first column like this table's year column, which essentially labels or provides great context for everything else in each row. And when you do that, then for a screen reader user, as they're reading through this table, moving row to row or column to column, they're going to have each cell's contents read to them along with a reminder of what column or row they've moved into. So essentially, along with a reminder of what that data represents. So for example, a screen reader user reading that 4 cell I've just highlighted, if they're reading left to right through the 2011 row, they're going to have 4 read to them along with the reminder that it represents home runs. And if they're reading up down through the home run column, they're going to have 4 read to them along with the reminder that it represents 2011. It just makes a huge difference for screen reader users and their ability to interpret data within tables. All right, next up, you should use table captions to summarize or contextualize the entire table. Table captions appear kind of like you see there, just a text label above the table. In this case, Buster Posey Statistics 2009 to 2012. They essentially help folks who are skimming through a page get a quick sense of what is represented in a table, so they'll know if they want to invest in reading it more in full. And the web page that we're linking to here, that will take you to a fantastic online repository of accessibility information, the webaim.org website. And that page in particular covers how to program both table header cells and captions. Third, you should only be using tables to present tabular data or information. That's actually what tables are specifically intended to do. And conversely, you should not be using them for layout purposes. That is, for the purpose of achieving a specific visual design. Tables are read in a very particular way by assistive technologies, and their structures imply very purposeful connections between each cell in a column or row. And when you use tables for layout purposes, you tend to create confusion in one or both of those regards, where folks are going to read things in an order that won't make sense, or they're going to infer connections that you didn't actually intend. Another great WebAIM page we're going to share with you covers that topic in more detail and has some great examples of why using tables for layout purposes can be a problem. All right, next up, the underline style. Pretty simple guidance with this feature. We just recommend that you avoid using it beyond link text and beyond its requirement with certain citation formats. Quite simply, when links are the only thing on your page using the underline style, that makes them a lot more easy to spot to somebody who's skimming through the page, maybe looking for links or looking for a link in particular. And we also recommend against it simply because it's one of the less legible methods of emphasizing text. Just having that line beneath certain characters will make them more difficult to discern. So if you need to emphasize text, use bold, maybe use italics instead. They're easier to read. All right, next up, it's not actually that format menu that I want to talk about. Really, it's headings. Headings are one of the most valuable tools we have to provide to users, particularly assistive technology users or screen reader users. And thankfully, many rich text editors offer a menu like this that allows you to assign different headings. For instance, here is the equivalent menu within the Canvas rich text editor. Now, to help illustrate just how valuable headings are, I want you to think back to your textbook days, maybe high school, college. remember trying to find a particular piece of information in a really long and dense textbook and how you might turn to either the index or the table of contents for help with that. Now, table of contents offer a ton of advantages. First, they allow you to get a sense of what is in each chapter without you having to read through the textbook in full. Also, through their outline structure that many of them employ, they allow you to get a sense of how the various chapters relate to one another. So for instance, just because it's beneath it and indented a degree further, we can pretty reasonably infer that that case study has something to do with origins of the subject. And then lastly, through their page numbers, table of contents allow you to jump straight to a particular chapter. Well, headings, they offer all of those same advantages to screen reader users. They allow them to get a sense of what is in each section without having to just read through a page or document in full. They also allow them to get a sense of how the various sections relate to one another, and they provide a means for jumping straight to a particular section. So our first bit of guidance with headings is pretty simple. We just recommend you use them. Use them to introduce the various sections within your pages. Now you're seeing a few different heading numbers there. You should choose which heading numbers to use based on your heading hierarchy, not based on visual preference, in part because you can customize the visual aspect with the rich text editor's other control, regardless of which of those heading numbers you choose. So what do we mean by heading hierarchy? Well, it actually maps right back onto our table of contents example, where the same relationships that we see communicated here through the outline structure and different degrees of indentation, those are actually reflected in our heading numbers, where heading 1, that's the highest level thing in your hierarchy, and because of that, there is very often just one of them. Heading 2s will introduce main sections within your hierarchy. Heading 3s introduce subsections within main sections. Heading 4s introduce subsections, and so on. Now, one wrinkle as far as choosing which headings to use, many web pages that have rich text editors within them will already have heading 1s and sometimes heading 2s programmed within them. And you'd want to choose which headings to use in your rich text editor on that basis. So for example, when I'm working on a web page here at OP, which involves using a rich text editor, I happen to know that the website domain name, in this case, electronic accessibility, it's already going to be programmed as a heading 1. And the web page name, in this case, create accessible PDFs, that's already going to be programmed as a heading 2. So any new heading that I add into my rich text editor is very likely going to be a heading 3 because it's going to be introducing a section within the web page, which is represented by a heading 2. Most, if not all, web browsers these days offer a feature you can use to tell what headings are already programmed on your web pages. You would just right-click on some text that you suspect is a heading, choose inspect, or it might be called inspect element. It's going to bring up a snippet of HTML in which you can see how that text is programmed. So for instance, here we have confirmation that indeed electronic accessibility is programmed as a heading 1 and create accessible PDFs is programmed as a heading 2. All right, next up, the color controls. If you're using those, you just want to ensure that your color choices are contrast compliant. That is, that there is sufficient contrast between foreground elements like text and any background colors behind them so that the foreground elements can be easily read. There are official contrast ratio standards you're aiming to achieve here, but don't worry, there are tons of tools, browser plugins, apps, even web pages that can help you assess your colors. They'll tell you if they pass the required standards, and if not, they can actually help you find color variants that will pass. For more information on using those tools and a few other things color related, I highly recommend you check out our recording of last year's GAD webinar. In the Simple Steps for Improving Accessibility session, my colleagues Amy Chen and Eric Mays cover those topics. All right, next, the list controls. Simple guidance here, we just recommend you use those. Those are what programs lists in a way that allow them to be recognized as lists by assistive technologies. And that way folks can infer the purposeful connections that you intend between list items. Don't just manually type in numbers, letters, or dashes to create your lists. Those are not going to be recognized as lists. All right, links. And this is a piece of guidance that we really hope you can apply as universally as possible in just every setting you can. You want to ensure that all of your link text that is hosting a hyperlink, that it's unique and descriptive. Don't use generic link text like click here, learn more, this link, or anything else generic like that, because we need link text to provide on its own a sense of a link's destination. This is important for a few reasons. I mean, nobody should really have to read a surrounding paragraph just to understand where a link is going to take them. But in particular, for screen reader users, there are a few ways where they will encounter links where all they have to go off of is the link text. They won't even have the opportunity to explore surrounding paragraphs. And in a situation like that, where literally all you get is the link text, and let me replicate that for you pretty clearly, click here, learn more. Link text like that is going to give you no sense of where those links are taking you. Whereas descriptive link text like UC electronic accessibility, you can pretty reasonably guess that link's destination. All right, a few other pieces of link guidance. You should avoid using URLs as link text. They just tend to be long and not very descriptive. So you should really only be using them in print or in presentations, because in those situations, folks can't click on a link, so they'll need to see the full URL to know the link's destination. And if you're linking to files, go ahead and include the file type at the end in the link text, like accessibility procurement guidelines with PDF in parentheses there at the end. That's going to help set expectations that folks are opening or downloading a file instead of opening a web page. All right, images. If you're including images in your rich text editors, if they're decorative images, which are images that you're pretty much just including to enhance the visual design of your page, they're not intended to send any new or unique messages to users. Those you'd want to hide from assistive technology so that it's one less bit of noise that screen readers have to encounter. And to do that, you would just give them null alt text. So leave the alt text field blank or use the HTML equivalent of alt equals open quote, close quote. Or if your rich text editor has a control for marking an image as decorative as the Cascade editor does, you can go ahead and use that. Then for non-decorative images, that is images that you intend to either explicitly or implicitly communicate a message to users, those you'd want to give succinct descriptive alt text so screen reader users know what is being shown and why. And the web aim page that we're linking to here has some great guidance on crafting alt text. All right, the media feature. If you're including media in your rich text editors, any videos that you include must be captioned. Any audio files you include must be accompanied by transcripts so folks who have difficulty hearing can fully follow along. You want to ensure that all the media controls can be accessed using only keyboard commands, as Joshua is going to show us in the next session. And for some videos, you may need to provide an alternate media description describing key visuals not already adequately described within the video's audio. And for more information on both captions and alternate media descriptions, there's another great session from last year's GAD webinar you can check out, the Demystifying Captions in Less Than 10-Minute session by our colleague Stephanie Nielsen. And we also wanted to thank Stephanie for doing our Zoom backgrounds again this year. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, last feature I wanted to talk about, the source/HTML view feature. You're not going to find it in all rich text editors, but where you do find it, it allows you to view and edit the HTML programming behind what you've put into your rich text editor. And the reason I wanted to mention this is that if you're working in rich text editors a lot and they have this feature available, it's really worth learning a bit of HTML and maybe some CSS as well, because that knowledge will dramatically expand both your design and accessibility capabilities in the rich text editor. There are certain things that you may only be able to do through that HTML view, such as programming table header cells or captions, or removing empty links or empty tags, which we'll talk about in another session. Pretty much everything I discussed today and a whole lot more, you're going to have expanded capabilities if you know a bit of HTML. All right, well, thank you so much for following along. Again, be on the lookout for the slide deck afterwards, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Hi, my name is Joshua Horry. I am the Accessible Technology Coordinator for the Information Educational Technology as well as the Academic Technology Services at UC Davis. So I used to work with students primarily, and now I work primarily with faculty and staff. And today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing how you can do a simple accessibility test, such as testing for keyboard accessibility. I'm going to be doing it across multiple different web platforms. So first, I'm going to be starting off with Web 1, which is the early days of the internet. Web 1, which was very static pages. You really couldn't interact with them, but users could jump around really quickly. So here, I'm going to start off at the top. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Tab first, see if I can see where I am. And right now, I can see I'm on Launch World Wide Web. I hit tab again, I can see home. And what I'm doing is, this is how people with mobility issues or even low vision or blindness navigate around the page. They're hitting tab. So I'm going to hit tab again. I'm going to see timeline, browser, typography, inside the code. And as you get more adjusted to see how it does, I challenge you to hold down the tab button and then let go and see if you can see where it is. So this is letting you know that it is keyboard accessible. You can see where it is. No matter where you go, I can tap on it really quickly. As you can see, it's even going through the video controls down over here on the screen. Now I'm going to go over to another page. This is also a Web 1 technology. This is dynamic HTML. This is the starting of divs. But if I try and tab through here, tabbed once, I can't see anything. Tabbed again, still can't see anything. And here, I cannot access any of these pages inside of the web. So it's literally inaccessible to those who are blind, low vision, or even mobility impaired. You would need to use some kind of a touch screen or mouse to get inside of here. But I can't get anywhere inside of here. So let me try and go over into Web 2. Web 2 is what we're currently experiencing. These are dynamic web pages. So people could create centralized locations where users could come and post content onto it. This, of course, makes the content the owner of whoever created the technology. So in here, I'm on Craigslist, where if this is where users could post things for sale or look for work or anything else like that. I'm going to hit tab once, and I can see I'm in Sacramento. Tab again, Craigslist. Tab again, create a posting. Tab again, my account. Now let me just hold it down, see if we can see where we're going. You can see it going through the calendar, going through the side menu, going through community now. So you can definitely see where all of this is going. Very keyboard accessible. I can access this whether I'm using just a keyboard or maybe even just a screen reader. Now here's another Web 2 site. This is a web page that's demonstrating dyslexia. So this is one of the reasons why we provide text-to-speech for our students. They got workarounds. And when I hit tab on here, you'll notice I can see each place that I'm going to. So this is actually really accessible to keyboards. And I just thought this was a fun page to share to show people an alternative disability rather than blindness. So for most of most of the students I work for, this would be an extreme version of dyslexia. For most of my students is when they look down to take a note or answer a question and look back up, oh, it's a new page. So this is just one of the reasons why we provide text-to-speech for some of our users. Another Web 2 technology is Apple Pages. So stores, online stores, that they were very dynamic, pulled content in as you needed it. Let me hit tab over here. I'll go over to Apple Store, tab again, Mac, iPad. Now, if I'm to hold it down, you can see where it is at all times. So I know that my screen readers, low vision users, and mobility impaired users can access every element on this page. Really nicely done. Next, I'm going to go over to our UCOP site, because we got to prove we're accessible too, right? So I'm going to hit tab first. We got to skip to main content right over there, and I'll show you why it's really useful here in a minute. I'm going to hit tab again, go over to UCOP Office of the President icon, tab again. It's jobs, tab again, people. I go inside of search. Now I'm in the menus, home, about, organization. And when I hit tab again, well, there's a skip organization menu, very nice. But this is one of the reasons why we have the skip navigation. So you don't have to go through this each time you come to this page. You can go straight down to right below where the cookies are. So it's going through the cookies right now. It's going through overview. So this is very well done. Yay, Judy. Judy, who's actually on here. So very well done with the keyboard accessibility, very nicely keyboard accessible. We know that all of our screen readers, low vision magnify users, as well as our disabled mobility impaired users can access it. Now, Web3. So Web3 is an upcoming technology. It's really became mainstream in 2021. Web3 is going to be migrating the web onto the blockchain. So we're seeing a lot of content that's actually being made available. And this is becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry where they're actually posting content of jobs online. Now, on here, I'm showing a really easy and simple to use Web3 page. Doesn't look very much different than what you experienced in Web 2. But if I tab through it, skip the timeline. They're doing great. Goes over to icon, goes over Web3 is just going great, which is the name of the site. Goes over to Twitter, Mastodon, RSS, which are some of the social media that they're on. Twitter, share link. What is the web? Glossary about this product. Now, as I'm jumping through this, you can see that it's going through everything and you can visually see where it is at all times. One thing that's different, if I hold down tab, doesn't keep up with it. But if I let go, I can see where I am. I think this site's very nicely done, can very easily interact most likely with screen readers and those with mobility impairments. Now, another one, NFTs. NFTs are becoming really widely talked about, but in their current use, not very widely used. But in the future, everything that you have in your pocket will eventually be an NFT. Your driver's license, credit cards, your keys, all of that will eventually be an NFT. Now, can we navigate through this? Tab, tab, uh-oh. Oop. I see I'm in the search field right over here. Let me hit tab again. I'm on my profile. So instead of highlighting it, they're bolding some of the words. I can kind of see where that is now. I can see it's on the create button. And now I don't see where it is. I'm hitting tab, 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 tab. I don't see where it is. Now, if you can imagine, if it's going to be used for all these potential products, how are you going to be able to tell which NFT that you're displaying to somebody if you're trying to prove your driver's license or trying to get into your house? These things will need to be made accessible at some point. Now, one other cool thing about Web3 are the bounty boards. These are jobs that you can actually apply for and get payments for it, actually fulfilling the bounties. So let me tab through this. I'm going to hit tab once. We're in beta, report bugs here. Layer 3, bounties, context, projects. As I'm tabbing, it is going through each one of the icons. I can see where I'm going. I can apply for these bounties. That's actually pretty cool. Let me try another bounty board. This one's a little bit more complex. This is almost like Trello and Google all mixed in together. But there's one right there that says social media listening and monitoring, and you can get paid $50 for that. Oh my goodness, can I get down to it? Let me hit tab. Uh-oh, I'm on home, tab. I don't see where I am, tab, tab, don't see it, tab. Oh, I can open up the side menu, tab, tab, don't see anything, tab, 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 tab. I am tabbing through this. Oh, and now it's getting through the top menus. Tab again, don't know where I am. Oh, I'm in sorting now. If I tab again, I don't see where I am. Tab, oh, I'm on submit work. But it skipped over everything else that I can access the bounty board, and I can just submit work only. And if you notice, I can only do that. So this is one of those areas that we could probably improve accessibility, but these are really exciting technologies that are coming, that are being made available now. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending the keyboard accessibility, and I'll share this back over to Douglas for his Family Feud game.
All right. Hello again, everyone. Well, as one of the world's top public research institutions and a global innovation engine, we here at UC like to do things driven by solid research and data. And indeed, both of those can help guide our accessibility efforts at UC as well. We're eager to share that research and data with you, but how about we make it a little more fun? How about we turn it into a friendly feud? That's right, we're going to bring up some of your UC colleagues representing UCLP and UCLA to see if they can identify the data points we'll be sharing with you. I encourage you to follow along at home, in the office, or on campus. Just jot down answers you think you might know and see if you can apply this information towards your own accessibility efforts. All right then, well, without any further ado, let's bring up our contestants. Representing UCLP, Judy Tai, and representing UCLA, Chris Patterson. All right, well, let's head right into our first question. More Americans live with disabilities than you may realize. According to the CDC, what are the most common types of disabilities amongst adult Americans? That is, folks 18 years and older. Top 6 answers are on the board, and since this is a friendly feud, we're going to take turns trying to find them. UCLA, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So how about somebody who's blind, or maybe they can see a little bit, but they're legally blind?
All right, do we have blindness or difficulty seeing? Yes. Blindness or difficulty seeing is the 5th most common type of disability, experienced by around 5% of the population, which is actually quite a lot of people when you think about it. That means roughly 1 in 20 of your colleagues and members of the communities you serve really need things like sufficient size and contrast and programming that allows screen readers to follow along. UCLP, how about your first answer?
Well, one of my grandparents used to have trouble going grocery shopping, so I would help them.
All right, do we have trouble going grocery shopping on the board? Yes, the CDC actually categorizes that as independent living or having difficulty doing errands alone. At around 7% of the population, it's the 3rd most common disability. UCLA, let's go back to you.
Sure. I have a friend who has trouble getting dressed by themselves. So they have an aide that comes in and helps them.
All right, do we have getting dressed by themselves? Yes, the CDC categorizes that as self-care, which is difficulty dressing or bathing. That's 4% of the population and the 6th most common disability. UCLP?
What about difficulty concentrating, focusing, or remembering things?
All right, let's see. Yeah, absolutely. The CDC categorizes all of those as cognitive disabilities, and they're experienced by about 11% of the population, making them the 2nd most common type of disability. So it's really important that we, as people who work so much with information, package it in ways that everyone can more easily engage with and understand. The top answer is still on the board. UCLA, do you think you can get it?
Sure. I'm going to go with walking. People use wheelchairs because they can't walk.
All right, is it walking? Yes, mobility disabilities affect about 14% of the population. They're the most common type of disability and super relevant to our facilities colleagues and the amazing work they do. There's one more answer on the board. UCLP, do you think you can get it?
Yeah, what about when you can't hear so well?
All right, do we have hearing? Yes, hearing-related disabilities are the 4th most common, experienced by around 6% of adult Americans. Again, you're looking at a little more than 1 in 20 colleagues and constituents needing things like captions and live webinars and videos and transcripts for any audio you share. Overall, roughly 26% of Americans college-aged or older experience a disability. That's 1 in 4 of us. We always like to highlight that incorporating accessibility into your work is one of the best ways staff of any level, from our senior leaders down to our fantastic student workers, can contribute to UC's equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging missions. And when you look at those numbers, clearly, by engaging in accessibility, we have the opportunity to improve the experience of so many individuals, including many of those we're reaching through other efforts who need a more accessible experience. All right, well, let's move on to the second question. As we've mentioned a few times, screen reader software reads out the contents of websites and documents to individuals who have difficulty seeing. And screen readers, like other assistive technologies, they rely on content to be programmed in particular ways so it can be read and interpreted properly. So let's explore what programming screen reader users need most from us. WebAIM, that fantastic resource I mentioned earlier, they conduct an annual screen reader user survey, and they asked screen reader users how they most commonly try to find information on web pages. That is, what features do screen reader users most commonly use and rely on us to enable? Top 5 answers are on the board, and since we finished with UCOP, let's start again with UCLA.
How about checking all the links on the page?
All right, do we have reading links? Yes, 7% of respondents went straight to exploring the links, which reinforces some of the reasons why it's so important for us to use descriptive link text. UCOP, do you think you can find a more popular response?
Maybe. How about just reading through the entire page?
All right, reading the page in full. Yeah, that was actually the third most popular answer, accounting for 8% of respondents. UCLA, let's take it back to you.
I like to search within the page, so Command F or Control F.
All right, let's see. Yep, Control or Command F, the search or find feature. Hey, it's a great method for anyone trying to find specific words. It was the second most popular response, provided by 14% of respondents. UCOP, let's go back to you.
What if you just ask someone to read the page for you?
All right, somebody reading the page for you. Oh, I'm sorry, UCOP, that's a strike and not one of the answers on the board. The thing is, screen reader users, like all of us, they want to be able to do things on their own. They don't want to have to rely on someone else to be a part of our community. And hey, who can blame them? All right, well, with that strike for UCOP, we're going to go back to UCLA.
When I'm reading a newspaper, I like to read the headings first to get an idea of what's there. So how about headings?
All right, do we have headings? Yes, wow. Headings was by far the most popular answer, provided by 68% of respondents. So again, it really helps screen reader users to introduce each section with a heading and to use a proper heading hierarchy. UCOP, there is one more answer on the board. Do you think you can guess it?
Well, there's a way to identify a section of the page as containing content. Could it be that?
All right, identified sections of the page. Yeah, landmarked regions. Those were mentioned by 3% of respondents. So if you're a web or software designer and can include those, fantastic. All right, well, great progress all around. Let's move on to the third and final question. According to WebAIM's annual accessibility audit of the top 1 million websites, what are the 5 most common accessibility failures, which we can also think of as the 5 most urgent things for us to address in our own web accessibility efforts? Top 5 answers are on the board, and since we again ended with UCOP, let's start with UCLA.
How about adding images to the page, but forgetting what to explain what they're about?
All right, images that aren't described. Yes, missing alt text was the second most common website failure, with 61% of homepages having images that aren't described or decorative images that weren't hidden, leaving screen reader users confused and disadvantaged by not knowing what is being shown and why. UCOP, how about your first try?
Well, sometimes when people update a web page, they highlight and delete text, but that leaves behind the link in the code.
All right, a link left behind in the code. Yeah, that does happen actually, with 51% of websites. And it commonly occurs with other types of empty HTML tags as well, where users will hear a content type like link read to them without any actual content following it up, leaving them confused and often unsure if there's something important there that they're just missing. All right, UCLA, you're up.
Sometimes I find hidden links at the top of the page. Is that an accessibility problem?
All right, hidden links. Oh, I'm sorry, that's another strike. The thing is, as Joshua showed us in the last session, those hidden links are actually an accessibility feature. They help folks skip past website headers and repeated content straight to a website's main content. That was UCLA's turn, so we're going to go back to UCLP.
Many websites have white text against this really light background, and that makes it difficult to read.
All right, that sounds like a contrast issue. Do we have low contrast? Yes, it was actually the top answer on the board. Amazingly, 86% of homepages have that accessibility issue, and we still encounter it as well in a lot of other visual mediums like presentations and documents. All right, UCLA, let's go back to you.
Sometimes form fields are not labeled properly, so you don't know what goes in that field.
Right, unlabeled form fields. Yeah, that was the third most popular answer, with 54% of web pages having that issue, leaving screen reader users uncertain what they're supposed to be entering into different fields. UCOP, do you think you can guess that last answer on the board?
I think so. Sometimes people use tables on their web pages when they really shouldn't.
Yep, you got it. 27% of homepages have that issue. Like I mentioned earlier, tables should only be used to present tabular data or information and should not be used for layout purposes. Well, UCOP and UCLA, you both did extremely well and only had one strike apiece. So in the spirit of our friendly feud, let's just declare you both winners. I hope you enjoyed following along at home, and we hope you can apply this information toward making the UC experience even better and more inclusive for all our community members, including those who have disabilities and impairments. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Thanks, Doug. I hope you guys enjoyed that friendly feud. I'm Jim Phillips and I work at UC Santa Cruz in the ITS department. I'm on the Experience Strategy and Design team where I serve as the Digital Accessibility and Equity Program Lead. I use he, him pronouns, and the title of my presentation is Accessibility Matters. It's a privilege to offer the closing remarks to today's awesome GAD event. We had some great speakers. I'm showing an overview slide that describes some of the ideas I'll cover that bear witness to the importance of accessibility. I might reinforce or reiterate some of the ideas you've heard along the way. It's way easier to do things when you know why, and one of the big whys for us is we have a UC electronic accessibility policy. The policy helps to raise awareness about the need for digital accessibility compliance, but also can lead to modifying how people do work. And that involves changing how we think about the needs of all those people who use our digital platforms. That is really one of the main tenets of user experience design. We want to encourage you to keep in mind the different types of people who use the websites we design and the applications we build or the systems the campus purchase. The mind shift needs to become human-centered. Looking forward, if we're successful and people do in fact change how they work, then their job descriptions ought to reflect any new added responsibilities. The challenge for the UC system is to put in place a support infrastructure that can grow over time and adapt to them to meet the growing needs of each campus so that we can ensure that our digital environments not only become 100% accessible, but remain so going forward. The next slide presents some information on our UC system-wide policy. So the good news is we already have a system-wide policy in place. Everything needs to be accessible, and that's federal law too. That means we don't have to develop a policy for each campus. If you look at the policy as it's currently written, it indicates that, and I quote, "The intent is to help ensure that as broad a population as possible may access, benefit from, and contribute to the university's programs and services," close quote. Also, there's an Electronic Accessibility Committee, the EAC, that meets monthly to coordinate our system-wide collaborative efforts. Thus, we can benefit from the work each of us are doing on our UC campuses. We are so fortunate to have such a diverse community here at the UC, and we want to make sure that everyone can participate and unlock their individual creative potential. The slide here describes some of the pros and cons, and it's titled On the Upside. One final positive that I'd like to emphasize is there's a lot of goodwill in supporting individuals with disabilities. People really want to help because they may know someone or have a family member who relies on assistive technologies to function in today's increasingly digital world. They may want to volunteer, sometimes because they themselves have had to confront barriers. As mentioned earlier, maybe it was an injury that resulted in a temporary need, or maybe it's a more permanent or evolving situation that requires their reliance on assistive technologies. The point is, we don't have to sell the value proposition here. People already get it, but it can be overwhelming to think about implementing accessibility best practices. Many people don't even know where to begin. So to a certain extent, there will always be some degree of inaccessibility as our students continue to push the technological limits of our campus networks and systems, as faculty find innovative ways to do research and engage in the latest instructional methods, and staff have to adapt to the constant torrent of new administrative and business system rollouts. Driven by emerging technologies, IT security and data privacy concerns, or just the simple march forward of consumer preferences, technological churn and obsolescence is like a long, rapidly flowing river. If your campus has not yet implemented a plan per the system-wide requirement, efforts to provide support won't be as coordinated as they might be. And when that happens, we end up reacting to one-off needs, usually as they arise, but sometimes relate to respond, and that's not acceptable. Despite our best efforts, it can feel that we operate in a reactive way and in an ad hoc manner, and that doesn't feel very good for the staff who provide support. The next slide's title is So Where Do We Want to Be? And it describes 4 key factors. So what's needed to get there? It's the usual suspects: sound governance, a bit more funding, robust communication channels, and a lot of collaborative planning with shared objectives and shared metrics that accurately measure how we are actually doing. Your individual campus may be further along on this journey. Ideally, the student experience or the experience of a faculty member or staff person would be similar across all the UC campuses, ideally. But to accomplish that, we still have much work to do. This slide describes the need to expand services and support. With the critical components in place, a campus can roll out more services that have broader impact, such as a service to help people with procuring products and services, more support for faculty and staff who have disabilities, support to help people design their content and services with accessibility in mind, relying on UX design principles, and enough people power to begin reporting on our campus-wide progress to achieve a more accessible IT environment. This slide takes a slight detour to reflect on our pandemic response. The most recent EDUCAUSE Horizon report, which focuses mainly on instruction, opens by acknowledging that many changes, acknowledges the many changes that have taken place due to the pandemic. This involves some remarkable shifts in how we do business, and I quote the Horizon report. These shifts may reflect an evolution from short-term emergency or reactive modes of offering education during extraordinary circumstances to making strategic and sustainable investments in a future that will be very much unlike our past. Close quote. It really feels like a paradigm shift, or at least a new equilibrium is being established. During the pandemic, many groups worked together to transform our digital environments. Our network and systems had to suddenly handle an increased load of people, and in some cases, new applications were procured and rapidly deployed, or old systems were devoted to new purposes. We had to establish ways to enable online transactions to occur, deliver instruction without the benefit of meeting face-to-face, and rethink our own personal living environments, which unexpectedly had to also serve as workspaces. With this came increased demand for website accessibility, and many, if not all, of our campus service providers who support individuals with disabilities sustained a deluge of new accommodation requests. Was this an early indication that students were struggling with online learning formats, or were we all just suddenly coming to terms with our own physical, cognitive, and ergonomic capacity to operate in an increasingly digital world? Regardless, it was a big adjustment. Reflecting on all of our efforts, there's much to be proud of, and we should also acknowledge that it didn't work perfectly, not for everyone. The title of this slide is Testing for Accessibility. But in the face of all these changes and shifts, how we test for accessibility didn't change. In that context, it was very hard to keep pace. Testing to ensure that our digital environments are accessible takes time. It can be seen as obstructive to the procurement process, and testing does also carry real financial costs. So what do we mean exactly by testing? Testing means that you have people with disabilities try to use your websites or systems, get their feedback, and take action on their feedback too when it's necessary and appropriate. And test again after implementation. If you are actually coding or building something digital, engage in quality assurance QA best practices that include accessibility testing. There's software applications that can help you do that. Perform checkups on your web content using automated testing tools like SiteImprove, And while not high on anyone's list of fun things to do, it's important to subject your content, core business applications, and support practices to periodic internal audits. If you discover that you do need a workaround, document it so people know what to do. All of this is important because if somebody came to you with a request for accessibility assistance tomorrow, do you know what to do? If you don't, you're not alone. This next to last slide describes the effects of digital transformation on what we do. Today, on the heels of all this massive digital transformation that we've just endured, one thing is clear. We continue to be faced with a rapidly evolving technology marketplace. Many industries, including colleges and universities, now have to innovate quickly and at scale. At every step along the way, concerns persist about IT security and data privacy. In this context, you can begin to see accessibility that it's a bundle of different things. It's part compliance, part diversity, part training and support. It's a series of design choices, and it's also a key component of our technical infrastructure. Building accessibility into the plan should underpin the adoption and rollout of all new solutions on campus. The digital environments we commonly use, such as Canvas, increasingly resemble one another. And in that sense, we don't differentiate ourselves in the same way as we were able to in the past. The journey a person takes when navigating our digital environments may also feel quite similar. In many respects, that consistency of experience and that familiarity is a positive. But even though we are migrating toward a common set of containers, the contents that we put into our systems have the potential to be highly differentiated. To the extent that we can humanize the digital experience for people seeking information on our websites or gaining access to systems to conduct research or participating in instructional activities, we can carve out a competitive advantage. The big takeaway is that usability and accessibility, which both fall into the realm of equity, diversity, and inclusion, can be a point of positive differentiation for the UC. We can leverage the homogenizing effect of digital transformation to our advantage if we are willing to engage proactively in the collaborative design work necessary to make it so. In closing, our final slide states that Global Accessibility Awareness Day is a good day to take a moment and think holistically about where we are and where we want to be as individuals, as a campus, and as the greatest university system there is. Compliance alone won't motivate people to do what is necessary. Community and good faith efforts are essential, but alone won't do it either. Unfortunately, moral obligation tends not to drive human behavior. Instead, people take the path of least resistance and are driven mostly by self-interest. So what is the solution? You are the answer. Ultimately, to change behavior and to change how people think, not just about accessibility or equity or compliance or even diversity, but to reduce it down to its core in your planning, in your design choices, and in your daily work, we are asking you to simply consider the experience of people taking that journey through our digital environments to complete a task or sign up for classes or apply for a job here. Focusing on the person taking the journey through our digital environments is what allows you to become proactive. And thinking proactively and taking action to head off accessibility barriers is what can reduce or prevent legal headaches. If you try, it'll become second nature to you. And we'll avoid the frustrations that people encounter. You know, those frustrations that sometimes go unacknowledged or will worse still go unspoken, leading people to harbor resentment and eroding trust. As Darren said, be the bridge. The choices you make in how you design websites, how you present content, and the products and services you choose to purchase on behalf of the university all have an impact on end users. Our hope today is that you will take the information presented here, and if you're not there already, become a disability ally. Become proactive about accessibility. People really depend on it. And Yvonne, I'll throw it back to you. Have a great Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Okay, thank you all so much, and thank you to our audience. Just gonna, there we go. Thank you all. We are so happy that you joined us. We have just a couple of minutes left to answer a few questions live. And I'm going to launch our quick poll to get some feedback from you about this session. So I hope you can stay around to fill that out. I'll leave it up for a bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to ask, read out any questions and let the whole panel answer questions. Here comes the poll. And if for some reason you don't see it, try clicking on the three little dots after the More button. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. So I'll give everyone a moment to quickly answer the poll question. But the one, and thank you to our panelists as well. We've been answering questions as the presentations have been going along. The one lingering one was that Allison enjoyed our GAD background so much that she was wondering where she could download a copy of it. And Allison, I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. If it was during Jim's presentation, was it Jim's presentation background slides or was it our Zoom background? Zoom background.
So, we're going to take the recording and caption it and post everything to a website and add our slides. And we can also post that web background there or Zoom background there. And then this will probably take us just, a week or two. And then I can send the link out to everyone who registered for the webinar.
That's fantastic.
I would also like to state that we can follow up discussions on Slack. If you go to uctech.slack.com and log in, we have an accessibility channel inside of there. It is more accessible on mobile than it is on a desktop. So if you're looking for accessibility, I do suggest using the mobile app. Otherwise, if you send an email to infohelp@ucop.edu, we can add you to the Accessible-L listserv that we communicate across all UC campuses. So if you'd like to join the listserv and continue the discussion, please send an email once again to infohelp@ucop.edu.
Thank you, Joshua. That's a great tip. There are a couple more questions we have time for. One is, will the recording and slides also include the Q&A materials that people have been answering during the presentation? There are some good answers that are here that people want to be able to retain. Can we download those?
Yes, I believe we can. So we'll look into that.
Great.
Thanks for the suggestion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. There was also a question that I saw that I don't know. It mentions, is a UC-wide procurement of Blackboard Ally on the roadmap? Joshua answered, maybe. Some campuses have census access already, but I didn't know if there were anyone else that wanted to answer that question.
Yeah, I could speak to that. So the UC system does have a system-wide contract with SiteImprove, which is a really great tool for scanning your websites and public-facing websites. We're even looking at getting that tool to run in the LMS as well. But for now, the Ally tool is going to need to be purchased at the home campus. There is not on the roadmap right now for an entire UCOP license. I know Berkeley, UCLA, and UC Riverside are currently have contracts with the Ally tool. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You could find my information, Travis Lee. It's tlee@oarc.ucla.edu.
Thanks, Travis. And also there was a quick question asking for the Slack channel name, which Joshua put in the answered column. So we'll be able to download all of those for those of you who maybe didn't catch that.
And it's hashtag accessibility for those who can't interact with the chat.
Crystal asks, we've been increasingly using Zoom for large meetings, some of which include breakout sessions. We use the captioning feature in the main sessions, but that feature is not available in breakout sessions. Zoom recommends using a third-party closed captioning service. Does UC have plans to make this service available? I know, Joshua, you're typing an answer, but would you like to give it verbally as well?
Otter was one of those was one of the 5 contracts that was in the RFP through UCOT. So that you could actually use on mobile devices and share it with other participants in the chat.
Great, thank you. Another question from Taylor. What are some specific tips or tools for making webinars like this accessible, especially when there are slides or a presentation?
I can answer that one. So I think that when it's like a larger webinar and like the size of this one, or what 200 people or more, I would recommend getting a professional captioner as well as even an ASL interpreter. But for smaller ones, you don't have an infinite money to get this get these services. I would recommend putting on the auto captioner is one way to make it more accessible. Also, as the presenters should be formatting their PowerPoint presentations as accessibly as possible and share those documents out with the audience. And another best practice is for the presenter to also describe what is on the screen as they present as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger, for the compliment. And Diego, okay, that looks like that's been answered. Gwyneth had a clarifying question about the Slack, perhaps. You see text, something for the workspace. Maybe I asked the wrong question. Joshua is typing the exact URL for that. And then Wendy, I heard that the breakout room components for Zoom might be forthcoming soon. Oh, that's good to know. Good to know that they have a roadmap for some of those. And then David Ritz asks, did you get the photo? Perhaps that was personal.
That was for me.
Okay, sounds good. And I think that's it for now. Are there any other questions for the panelists today? Ah, okay. We'll give another moment. Does the Friendly Feud host do other other events?
Other events, birthdays, wedding, bar mitzvahs. Just call
And for
me.
a hefty fee, right?
I think that was the first costume change I ever saw in a UC webinar, though.
That was very impressive. Sandra asks, UC gets 5 agreements for assistive technologies. Oh. Very good.
Yep, 2 text-to-speech softwares, 2 note-taking softwares, a magnification software, and a screen reading software.
Excellent. And please I'll put pressure on Otter to sign a BAA so we can use it on the health side.
I would mention that these auto captioners are not WCAG compliant in terms of like what the standard that the UC wants to be at, but it is a pragmatic tool to get our content a little bit more accessible, especially video content, as well as audio only content. It is a recommendation to provide transcripts if you have like a podcast or something like that. But it is none of these AIs for captioning is compliant, but I think it's better than nothing.
Also, just to note that the Otter is almost SOC 2 compliant, which is what you're looking for. And we have found that when not wearing masks, even with macrobiology courses, we're hitting 99.3% accuracy. But with masks, we're hitting about 97% accuracy.
That's still really great.
Yes, well, the House of Representatives requires 98.5% accuracy to be able to caption inside of the House of Representatives.
Nice. Connie asks, are there any accessibility awareness events like today's focused on physical accessibility? Since we have so more and more in-person events these days.
There might be some on the GAD website. So Global Accessibility Awareness Day actually lists webinars that are going on all day today. And I would encourage you to go over to their website and seeing what other types of webinars or events are going on. There might even be some in-person events where they might be showing physical accessibility, because that is a very much needed thing, because our students love placing their backpacks everywhere.
No, thank you. And Leone, pardon me if I mispronounced that. The software agreements with UCOP still require units to initiate purchase orders with the vendor. If you are considering access for your unit, I strongly recommend that you speak with your procurement official for an overview of the documentation requirements. Thank you so much for that information.
Well, Rachel, we've gone over time, so I think we probably should wrap it up and let people get on to their next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to all of my fine, friendly panelists here, and everyone have a great Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.